911, what's your emergency?
The following content is graphic, emotional, includes dark humor that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised. These stories are based on real-life EMS, military, and healthcare experiences. Calls are real, providers are real, names and details have been changed to protect privacy. They may be disturbing to some and are definitely inappropriate for HR department. Any medical or mental health discussion is personal experience, not protocol. Use your damn brain. Follow your local guidelines, and when in doubt, call Med Control. If you're struggling, don't do it alone. Talk to someone, a coworker, a friend, a therapist, or hell, reach out to me. I'll answer. Need help right now? Text or call 988 or visit 988lifeline.org.
The first time I experienced everything starting to dull out and go quiet was during the time my grandmother was, passing. She wasn't dead, but watching, someone slowly die from cancer, it's a different type of death. I actually ended up with a folklore about it.
Wow.
And, the concept is it's when you're mourning someone still alive, you're mourning everything that won't come to be. But there's no funeral. There's no one asking you if you're okay. There's no one really paying attention.
If you think it's too heavy to say it anyway. It beats a eulogy. You don't have to apologize for surviving however you can. You're not the reason things are heavy. You're the reason they're still moving. Need support right now? Reach out to me. Reach out to somebody. Text or call 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. You're not alone. Not in this job. Not in this fight. Want to share your story or connect? Visit critical-run.com or message the Facebook page, Dispatched and Dysfunctional. We're building this for you, for them, for all of us.
911, what's your emergency?
The following content is graphic, emotional, includes dark humor that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised. These stories are based on real-life EMS, military, and healthcare experiences. Calls are real, providers are real, names and details have been changed to protect privacy. They may be disturbing to some and are definitely inappropriate for HR department. Any medical or mental health discussion is personal experience, not protocol. Use your damn brain. Follow your local guidelines, and when in doubt, call Med Control. If you're struggling, don't do it alone. Talk to someone, a coworker, a friend, a therapist, or hell, reach out to me. I'll answer. Need help right now? Text or call 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. All right, welcome back to Dispatched Dysfunctional. Today we're joined by Justin Anderson, known creatively as J. Vaelorin, who is here to discuss the stories we build so we don't break. Justin is a network engineer by day, dark fantasy author by night, and the founder of the Vaelorinverse, a world built around giving shape to depression, silence, guilt, grief, and the invisible weight people carry, which is a fantastic measure. He joined us not as a peer, and he's made that very clear, but as a respectful witness who is committed to helping people build a language for the heavy things that us as first responders carry home. So, Justin, before we get started, before we discuss anything else, who are you as a person, and why was this an important conversation to have?
So, as a person, I've kind of felt myself being the type of person that I don't judge others because everybody has a story. And I've learned, to be the type to kind of examine and see what that story is about. And this kind of has become the foundation of the Vaelorinverse because you never really know what anyone's carrying. And a lot of people will judge prematurely and they'll make assumptions about, oh, this person is lazy or they're just acting, and this person is really carrying an invisible weight that is heavier than anyone actually ever noticed. And just the concept of being able to do something to make that weight a little bit lighter, that became the kind of the driving force of putting out these different folklore to help other people.
That's part of my language, but that's fucking awesome. that's
Appreciate it.
that's a lot better answer than I was expecting, in all honesty. And I love how you don't judge people. You know, like you said, everyone has their own demons they fight. Everyone has their own backgrounds, and just from the way people look, we can't judge them by that. Hell, it's funny. About a year or so ago, I was working offshore, and I was in Boston doing a crew change, and I met a CEO of a company that looked like a homeless man, and he
Wow.
purposely did that. It was hilarious. I don't remember his name, but it was just hilarious. I mean, I was drunk as hell, but you know, we bumped into him, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to knock stuff out of your arms." And he's like, "No, no, no, I got plenty of money for that." And he told me he was a CEO of, some company up there, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, that was interesting."
Wow.
Well, it was pretty cool. I mean,
It definitely
so
proves the point.
it really did, and I think that's as he described to me. Again, I can't remember 100% of what exactly went on because I was a little three sheets to the wind, but he did explain to me, that is the reason he does that is he doesn't want people to know he has money when he's out in public, and he doesn't want them to be able to be like, "Oh, well, you have money, just give me some." Dude was really friendly. So,
And yeah, I mean, most people would judge him if he had money as someone to like tiptoe around or to pretty much use and or rob, unfortunately. But that just shows you like a lot of times we'll judge someone by how they look or the rumors we heard or maybe even how they talk, different things like that, positions they hold. And we don't ever really get to know them. And from that, you could be the one thing that keeps that person from going home feeling like the whole world's against them. And you join in just because you judge them before you actually give a chance to talk to them.
yes, sir. And that actually brings me to this right here. So, you wrote that turning depression into mythology was a survival mode before it was a project. That line is this whole episode here, pretty much. Because a lot of people think stories are just entertainment. Sometimes the stories are how people survive. It's the way we explain it. We cannot properly explain it in words to be able to get out of our mouths. Sometimes the pain doesn't come out as a diagnosis. It's sometimes a character. Hell, a monster, a wall, a shadow. A piece of folklore, as you write. Um, some artists, they write songs about it. It's always that there's parts of stories that people don't remember or don't understand. And for first responders, that matters 100%. Because a lot of us don't say I have anxiety. We just say I'm carrying something no one else sees, or I'm fine, I'm okay. Uh, so let's just start here. When did you realize that your stories were actually helping you and not just creating work? It was more of a survival for you.
Um, so it was kind of an interesting start. Um, I have, some childhood trauma. I grew up like one of two minorities in my neighborhood. And that led to a situation of I didn't, a lot of people say, oh, you have the choice to walk away from fighting or choice to be violent or you choose to be violent or not. But my option was to come home, beat up, clothes ripped every day, or to fight back. Um, so from a early age, I kind of learned what it was like to be judged. I learned what it was like to be disliked, um, just because of existing, really. And one thing I didn't realize that I did for all these years was I normalized that. I just thought that was how life was. It's like, well, you go through something and you just like, well, that's just how my life was. It's, whatever. And I moved on. My 10th grade year of high school, my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. She was the
Damn, I'm
first
sorry.
real death I've experienced. I had other family members die, but it wasn't like the ones that you spend time with every day. The first person to hold me was her. So that was my first real experience. Yep. My first real experience with death. And I didn't realize that I was dealing with depression at the time. As males, we were, especially the older generation, we're told, you don't be vulnerable, you don't cry, you don't share your feelings. It's unmanly to cry or to show those emotions. So just be tough. And I can remember I was angry. I was so angry all the time during that time. And I did it subsided after she passed, but it was something that I didn't realize I was carrying, so fast forward, I'm a grown man. I got a family of my own, and it's like, I'm looking at a way to make some extra income, I've always been good at writing. So I'll do four friends, four swords, defeat the demon lord type story and, maybe hopefully bring in some extra income. And I started writing, and all of a sudden, my characters slowly became these really in-depth characters with, their own struggles, own mental illnesses, things that I really wasn't planning for them to have. One of my characters has survivor guilt. One of them had PTSD, child abandonment issues. And I started kind of noticing that. And as I started really sitting back, I started realizing in some ways, the weight of my life became a little bit lighter, but it also became very apparent that these things I filed away, childhood trauma, dealing with my grandmother's passing that I just kind of tucked away, I didn't deal with, were still there. And that they came back with a vengeance. And it it spiraled me for a little bit, but as I understood what I was writing and how to take those emotions and kind of mold them into something that I could externalize, put outside of me, it really began to take shape in, this whole world I ended up building. This is how the memorial wall where people can honor their loved ones came about. These dark thoughts that I have when I spiral was the grounds for creating Whisper of the Veil, where people can go and release negative thoughts. And, it doesn't come back and say, oh, no, it's going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's just you release it and then you can see other people's negative thoughts. And a lot of people may be like, well, that doesn't sound good, but it shows you're not alone. A lot of times when we're dealing with negativity and negative thoughts, we feel like we're the only ones dealing with it. And to know that, yeah, my life is screwed up right now, but, I'm not alone in this. There are other people struggling. It kind of brings you back to grounding.
And I
And
think a lot of people need to hear that right there. But like you just said, none of us are truly alone in this. Um, and I didn't mean to interrupt you on that one, but that's the biggest thing. A lot of us, when we get into those dwelling moments of depression or, PTSD, anxiety, or what have you, we do feel like we're alone. But as you just stated, you're not.
yep.
And, I've lost quite a few friends to depression and PTSD, but the reaching out to someone is the biggest thing once you realize that you're not alone. There are others struggling.
And I agree. And my condolences on that. And a lot of us we don't see that. My mentor who's been mentoring me through like the concept of building this into a business. So I'm not, it's structured in a way that's digestible by people. Natasha, she mentioned, and she came up with the concept that, we all kind of walk in parallel and we don't realize it. I'm struggling and you struggling, but we're looking straight ahead and we don't realize that there's someone right next to us that's going through similar things or the same things we're going through. So it's sometimes one of those type of things of just looking beside you instead of ahead or looking down. And, like you said, you have help. You can speak to someone else about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is like you said a minute ago, is the older generations. Even when I was a kid, uh, it was always looked down upon to speak your feelings or show emotions. It was you shut the fuck up, get it done. Don't want to hear it.
Yep.
And in the field I work in, that's a lot of the older generation's mentality is you suck it up or you go home. And it sucks, but I do understand the mentality behind it because as a healthcare provider or a police officer or what have you, as a first responder, if you're having mental issues and you tell your supervisors or your leadership, they're going to end up benching you. That's probably what's going to happen because you're not able to provide the services you need to provide. And that's what sucks about it. But, at the same time, what's better, getting help for yourself and being able to treat people later or trying to bury it all down and have it come to a head at the end?
And that's one of the biggest things that I've started to learn about, your world, being a network engineer and someone outside of it. I've looked at and thought about, oh, this would be a really cool project to do. I would want to talk to a first responder, a firefighter. And as I've kind of explored learning about, your world, I realized, man, I got to be careful because if you mention, even if it is like trying to assist people with their mental health, but you mention, oh, well, I've had depression or I've experienced this, this could be a blow to your livelihood. This could cost you your job because of the fact that you mentioned, you are struggling with some kind of mental health crisis. And it's become a real eye opener on how in some occupations you don't get that ability to speak on, you know, things that are, haunting you or things that are really bothering you, while in other occupations it's very open and encouraged.
Right. And I hate to say it, but it is a double edged sword. Um, and that's the reason I started my podcast. It is for first responders to have an outlet, for people to understand, I've been through it. I've admitted to supervisors. Hell, I even quit a job, a very well paying job, um, because of my mental anguish in the end. I've spoke about it on an episode before. I had a friend of mine on board a ship kill himself, and now every time after that I went to open a door, the the visual images would always pop back. So I left working offshore to come back onshore for my own mental safety and mental health. Do I think I could go back offshore now? Probably. But, you know, it just takes time to get over it.
I agree with that. And, those are the toughest things where you're dealing with that. And like you said, there's so many different layers to it. Are you still looking to help someone else? I know that I can help someone else, so I don't want to focus on myself too much. And, dealing with those types of struggles. And then also just how society views first responders, with all the TV shows. Your job on TV looks exciting. It looks amazing. You're going to all these house calls and you're saving everyone, and they don't show, the toll it takes in a lot of them. I have a coworker who was a volunteer firefighter and a volunteer EMT. And even in my 30s, I didn't realize a lot of stuff that you see on TV it doesn't play out that way. Like when he was telling me about CPR and chest compressions, I truly thought it was like TV where you do the chest compressions. It's like 1, 2, 3. Okay, they wake up, they pop up, everything's good. And he's like, "Oh no, you're breaking ribs." He's like, "You're breaking ribs. You're hearing, the cracking and the sounds." He's like, "And they're not waking up, popping up." He's like, "They're out of it." And I'm like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yes, think about how hard you would have to push to compress somebody's heart." And when I started thinking about it, it was like, "Oh, damn, I'm dumb." But when you see it on TV, it looks so different. And just thinking about for you as a person, if you're giving CPR to someone and you're breaking ribs, that's graphic, that's vivid. That's something that you have to either get used to or adapt to, or it does become, it can scare you. You wouldn't be able to perform your job correctly.
Yeah, and that's one reason a lot of us have such dark humor. That's why a lot of us become numb to normal situations with death or normal situations with illnesses, is because of our job. We can't um, properly cope if we don't try to cope in our own mental ways, and it does get a little shaky sometimes. Don't get me wrong, but uh, it works for us. Um, and it kind of brings me to this next point that I got written down here is, you said depression doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like music going quiet. The book is still going, and the things that used to keep you alive loses their color one by one. And that pretty much summed up what you just said too. Is everything, you do get depressed after certain calls. After it don't even have to be a call, but you know, for and it's huge to me. I don't know about a lot of my listeners, but I know for me it's huge to have someone on the outside like yourself being able to support us the way you do. So, and that on that note is what when you said that, how does it look like to you whenever your music starts going quiet, your books are still going, and the things are just losing their color one by one?
For me, it's a real struggle. Like I said, I've been able to write pretty easily, whether it was stories, reports, poetry. The first time I experienced the, everything starting to dull out and go quiet was during the time my grandmother was, passing. She wasn't dead, but watching, someone slowly die from cancer, it's a different type of death. I actually ended up with a folklore about it,
Oh wow!
and the concept is it's when you're mourning someone still alive, you're mourning everything that won't come to be. Um, but there's no funeral, there's no one asking you if you're okay, there's no one really paying attention because they look at it like, well, that person is still alive and breathing. But you're watching this person, and this honestly goes for depression and anything. You're watching this person go from that vibrant, happy person, or however they were, even if they were ornery and attitudey, to this person that's a shell of themselves. And that's hard. And you realize that all the things that you imagine in the future, you won't get to see. That person won't be that person that you knew ever again. And when I was realizing that, I found it hard. The words wouldn't come out. It was like just watching my life drain and learning how to force myself to cope with it in different ways. You know, I started sleeping a lot more. Like I said, I didn't realize it was depression then, but you know, I rather sleep. And my grandmother, you know, when she would be in pain, you know, we would give her morphine at that point. And, you know, it takes time for stuff to kick in. So we're still hearing, me and my sister would hear her crying out in pain. And all we could do was try to turn the TV up to drown her out. And it hurt. And, you know, everything around me became just less important. It was like whenever I woke up, I felt sick. It was like just the worst feeling ever. And, you know, not being able to write, not being able to get my emotions out that way, everything started to come out in anger. And again, being told that, you know, I'm not supposed to cry. I found out anytime I felt like crying, I felt like being vulnerable, I would immediately get mad. It was almost like a defense mechanism. And it, that whole feeling of just seeing the world in this bleak way became my norm for a while. It was terrible.
And I'm guessing that's how you turned your depression into mythology is a survival mode and a defensive mode. Um, and that's how it came out, I guess. It wasn't a marketing scheme. It was something that you actually felt in your heart, and you wrote it, you know. And there is a difference between the cool dark fantasy world and building a language for pain that you just can't explain. Um, and I really do want to read a couple of your books. I'm going to end up buying a few. But so why did the mythology give you that ordinary language that you just couldn't be able to speak out?
I think the mythology, um, what it really did is that it allowed me to kind of distance myself from the pain in a different way. Um, it allowed me to almost like rename it. Uh, and that was one thing at the time I realized I wasn't ready for therapy, and I didn't find therapy to be a solution because the the way that I would describe it is when you go to therapy, you in some therapist's office, it's almost like learning a different language. You know, you go to therapy, it goes from I have something I don't know how to talk about to, oh, you have clinical depression, you have cognitive behavioral, you know, such and such, you have catastrophization. It's like there's all these names. It's like, wait, I got what? You and it's learning a different language. And the problem is, in my opinion, is that language comes with stigmas already. It comes with judgment. And so you don't really want to use something that before you even speak it to someone, you already know it's going to change their opinion of you. It's like, well, I have depression. Oh, mental illness. Okay, so as soon as I go and tell someone, oh, well, yeah, I have mental illness, complete conversation change. They're like, you know, some are concerned depending on what you're going to follow up with. Some are feeling pity for you. Some are assuming that you're not going to be able to function cognitively like what they would consider normal people to be. There's all these negativity. Um, and I think that's what, you know, the mythology allowed me to do was to voice how I was feeling in a manner that instead of having a stigma attached to it, people gravitate towards it. Poetry in music, when you think about the lyrics, sometimes if you listen to a song and you listen to those lyrics, you're like, man, they said some stuff. Or you read a poem, you're like, that was deep. But the way that it's described, the wording that's used, or the melody that's used, makes it like you want to sing along with it. You want to be able to repeat it. You want to quote this. And being able to speak about my depression, my grief and trauma in this way, it really helped, instead of saying, I have depression, saying that, I feel hollow, or, my thread is turning hollow. In my world, the thread is your soul. So being able to say that my thread is turning hollow, or describe it as a color, this dark, violent, it's almost beautiful, but it still is damaging and harmful, made it so much easier to build this language around it that could be used to basically become this like codex of how I'm feeling, as opposed to being able to directly say, those words that are associated with the negativity.
That's awesome. There's no way in hell I could ever be able to do that. Like you said, to be able to verbalize it the way you did, even like you said, the thread becoming hollow. I would have never thought of something like that. That's just artism at its best. That's you being an author, even when you don't want to be an author.
I agree.
And I guess that's your metaphors in the end on how you describe your feelings, and that's amazing. So I guess when you create characters, do you use the feelings that you're feeling when you're writing, or does it just how does that work?
When creating characters, in this kind of was one of the areas that kind of brought me through in writing. It was a rough spot for me. It also, it made me understand I really needed to assess my personal life differently, because I started writing, I felt myself improving, getting better. Everything was like, okay, I'm getting these emotions out. But I didn't know the writing world was so cruel. Like, man, it is toxic. And if they cannot fit you into a box, it becomes a problem. So there's different forms of writing. They call them plotters, people who plan, they plan every scene, every piece. There's people who they call pantsers, who have a general idea, but, they just kind of know, at the end of this, I want the world to blow up and somebody to reverse time. They don't really know how everything goes to get to that point, but they at least kind of know the end point. I find myself closer to the second one, but I didn't know the language of writing, in all honesty. Like I said, I've been writing for over 20 years, but I'd never learned the actual wording to communicate. Like, this is prose, this is purple prose, this is this. I just did it. So when I was asked those questions, trying to explain how I write was really hard, and it became a source of tension in these communities. Now that I've been doing it a little bit, I consider my writing closer to like method acting, where you've heard about like actors who get so immersed in their characters where they mentally become that character. They live as that character for a period of time. And some of them have to go to therapy and have to honestly go through like a whole detox of some sort to break themselves mentally from being that person, because they get so immersed in it. That's how I write my characters. I more compare it to watching a movie. Like, I'm watching that character from inside, and then when I step back to put it onto the page, I'm reporting it. So it's like living that character's life at the time. And that gets rough because I'm also living the traumas that the characters are going through. And when I step back into the author seat, I find myself sometimes getting depressed, getting wrapped up to the point where it is mentally, harmful for me. I have to step back. And I had to really sit down and talk with my wife and explain there's going to be times, I realize now, and there's going to be times when I'm writing that I may get done and I may just want to, be around you. I may not really talk to you at the moment, but I still would just want to be around you, being your presence. Please don't push, because as a lot of times, and males will close off when you start pushing. It's got to be like, let me open up. But I had to kind of give her that conversation because I realized that I would break sometimes if I went too long, and I would start to get real depressed. And I don't know, the clinical term for it. I call it like passive suicidal thoughts, where you're not actively seeking to harm yourself, but you're okay if something happens. If you're driving and you see a semi, you're like, oh yeah, if it just swerved to my lane, I'll be okay with that. And I was like, okay, this writing is helpful, but I have to now put guardrails around it to protect myself. Um, so
So
yep, go ahead.
how do you notice yourself going into one of these modes, I guess? Like say you just finished writing and you went driving and then you noticed that you did feel that way, like the truck coming into your lane would be okay. How do you notice that in yourself, or does your wife notice it before you notice it?
Tend to notice it. Living with, you know, my depression for, let's see, I'm what, 35? So about 15, 16 years, I've kind of started to notice my patterns. It's kind of almost like a level, like, I kind of feel down. I'm hard on myself, more than usual. It's like, okay, that one's still kind of iffy. That could be just me being frustrated without the results of something. The next stage for me is typically I'm starting to feel down, and now I'm starting to kind of lose interest in something. Like, I was really into playing this video game or watching this show. Now I'm just kind of like, I'd rather just lay here. And then for me, the next stage is like, now I just want to sleep. And I still interact with the people I love and I care about. Like if my son come in there and he's like, Dad, I interact with him, but I slowly find myself kind of wanting not so much for him to go away, but Daddy don't feel like playing right now. Daddy's tired. And, that's kind of typically my step before I start getting into that passive suicidal thought, stage. And once I'm in that stage, um, my thinking starts to get a little warped. And, that's getting towards the most dangerous points because I know my wife loves me. I know my kids love me. But once I hit that stage, there's, for me, I feel there's like two levels below. There's where now I'm thinking irrationally. I'm not making the actual plan, but I'm thinking that it would not be a bad thing if, I was to go through with it. And then the last stage is, of course, actively making a plan in my mind. And a lot of people don't understand with depression that your thinking starts to warp. Me and my wife, we had a real deep conversation about it because in my mind, I've only been that bad a couple times since me and her been together. But in my mind, I'm like, well, they'll be fine. They'll get my life support, with my life insurance, so they won't care. And sitting here with you now, I know that it would break my wife's heart. It would break my kids' heart, for me to do that. But in that moment, it doesn't really seem like they would care that much. I felt myself when I get to that point, I basically tie myself to singly being a provider. And my children and my wife only need me to provide. So even if I go through with it, that life insurance provides, so they'll be happy with that. And that's not the truth, but in those times, it feels so, so true. It feels like I figured everything out. Everything is okay. Nobody's going to care. And my role as a provider is solved. So what reason do I have not to do it now? And for people who've never experienced depression, they can't understand how you could assume, your children or loved ones could not care about you. And it's really hard to get them to understand. And I don't think my wife honestly understands, but I do think that she accepts as what I'm explaining to her is the truth on how I feel.
That makes sense. And the sad thing is like you said, if you haven't felt it, you won't be able to understand it. Um, and I've been there, uh, so I understand 100% on that. And it does help me in the end of my job as well to help provide to people that are telling me, "Hey, I'm in this dark place. I don't know what to do. I do want to end it." And of course, that's not the answer at all, ever. But
True.
when you're in that zone and you're in that mindset, it don't matter what anyone tells you. It don't matter what anyone does. You want that ultimate goal to be that goal. And until someone can break that thought train or that thought process, it's not going to happen. And as you wrote on your form here, is you mentioned, a cloaked figure is your intrusive thoughts. Your hollow mark is your severe depression. Your wall of scars is for your generational sacrifice. And that's how you help these images become a parallel vocabulary in the end, in my opinion. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but is that also what helps you in the end? As so on this side of things here is you're an author, and I know a lot of people that work in my realm that they like to write poems, they like to write short stories, write music, or play guitar or whatever. Um, is this something that helps you when you're doing your work? Is it something that would help you or does help you if you're feeling it to be able to get the right vocabulary out?
It does. It really does, because I think the reason why it helps so much is because it allows me to bridge um, the gap that we were just talking about in cases. Um, when I'm telling my wife, you know, I don't feel like you love me and I don't feel like our kids love me. They just want me to provide. Immediately, I've said some things within that conversation. Number one, that would be offensive, not meaning to. You're trying to really get help, but once you start saying things that people find offensive or they can't understand on a logical level, the conversation starts to die. So now, she's mad, I'm depressed, and it's a bad conversation, but being able to explain with poetry or with, you know, the words in my world, I can just give her this. I can be like, hey, I wrote this new piece. And, she sits with it and she reads it. Or some of them I have voice. She listens to it and she's like, oh, are you okay? she understands because it conveys that weight. She may not understand, the terminology fully in my world, but she can feel that weight. And that's the part that I think helps a lot of people. And I think for people who do experience, these negative thoughts and depression and, other types of thoughts that have this weight, being able to find a way to just show the weight of it is important. And for me, this is where um I started writing folklore, not just kind of for myself, but for other occupation and other people who have this invisible weight. I kind of learned as I've been managing myself, I do a really good job at being like a vessel and listening to what people say. My mind wants to build what I would honestly liken it to like a shelter, something that can help protect from that like weight, that depression, because it's like I've been there. And so even as me and you talk and you're telling me stuff in my mind, it's like I can see, folklore or words or quotes forming from that. And that's what started me building these other folklore in different ways, uh, from, you know, burning guilt, which, uh, touches on firefighters, survival guilt, um, Tears of a Caretaker, which touches on the fact of being a caretaker, taking care of someone who, uh, is losing their memories and things like that, the weight of that. And I've been able to kind of express externally or externalize emotions that others are feeling to allow them to kind of show other people in a way like, oh, have you read this? And then they kind of, people compare it. Oh, that's your job. That's what you do, right? Have you ever dealt with something like that? And it opens that door that typically is closed, whether it's because you're uncomfortable talking about it openly. You're sometimes you're okay if people ask, but going and saying I need help or bringing up the conversation yourself it's harder to do than if somebody comes to you and opens that door for you.
Right. And that you kind of bring me to my next point here is something that really caught my eye on the form that I asked for everybody to fill out. Is you wrote something very clear, and I respect it 100%. You wrote, "You're not a first responder. You are not trying to pretend that you worked on the truck, the engine, the patrol car, the dispatch console, or trauma bay. You said you are a witness, not a peer." And that honestly matters because first responders, we do smell the fakes. Um, and, so I guess let's name the honest tension here is how do you write for us as first responders without pretending to be one? Like you were just saying, you do write certain ways and you have mechanisms that you use. So how do you go about going from your perspective to our perspective and writing about it in the end, I guess?
Think the I believe the biggest thing to do is to really watch and observe. I think for most of the time, we jump to conclusions or we want to talk, we want to fix. And that's not always what the other side needs. Sometimes you just need to be witnessed, you need to be observed. And I think that's where the biggest difference comes. So the piece I talked about earlier, Burning Guilt, I know it relates to firefighters, but the story came from me observing a civilian doing what first responders do. Um, it was from a real life story of a person in Alabama. They were in an apartment complex and it caught fire, and this person saved 12 people by himself, knocking on doors, pulling people out. And he was telling the story to the news, and unfortunately there was 3 people he couldn't get to. And if you were to watch and listen to the story, everyone in the vicinity was focusing on how many he got out. Oh, you're a hero. You got this many out. And I don't feel he realized he was saying it or doing it if you really were to look at his facial expression, but he was stuck on those 3 he couldn't save. And
That's
he would
how
tell
we
you,
think.
yep,
Exactly how we think, because I hate to say it. Again, not trying to interrupt you. I apologize for interrupting you so much, but that to me, I remember a fire specifically, um, to where we got the mom, the dad, the brother, the sister out of a 3-year-old. I hate to say it. It sounds very cynical of me, but it sucks that the 3-year-old is the one that got to die. You know,
yep,
he, after the fire was out, we wound up finding him buried underneath a dresser, with claw marks on the dresser because he tried to escape. And it stuck with me knowing that we lost one. I'm very happy we saved the others. Don't get me wrong on that. But as you were saying, it's those 3 that stuck with that guy who got 14 out.
exactly.
It sucks, but you know,
And then everyone focuses on who you did save. And it's like inside, that makes that feel heavier because it's like, I know how many I did, but this is the number I didn't.
exactly.
And that is, like I said, I've never been in that situation, but observing, really, really watching and listening, you can pick up on where the pain points are. And in that interview, that was what I was picking up from him because he was like, he's telling this reporter, he's like, I had to go pull them out and people are trying to go back in to get their phones, which also tells me, what kind of the difficulty in your job, what people care about. Um, people trying to go in and get their phones. And he was like, but man, I couldn't save these 3. And they're like, yeah, but you got, 12, 14 out. He was like, yeah, and I did all I could do. But if I had a better jacket, I would have saved those 3. And then it kept going on. And then, man, I'm telling you, if I had a better jacket, I would have saved those 3. In this conversation, nobody acknowledged really that he was focused on those 3, and they didn't really, it's just all about who he did save. And it's like, but in this moment, whether he knows it or not, he's telling you where his mind is. And a lot of people don't listen. And I feel like this is where, when I write folklore and I'm hearing someone talk, you pay attention and you look at that body language, you look at the shift in the eyes. As when you're starting to reflect on something, your eyes kind of look off in the distance. You listen to the weight of the words on how they say it. If you're telling me you got that A+ and I'm like, yeah, but I missed that one question. Okay, I'm letting you know with the weight of that words that one question means more to me than what I just did. I'm not caring about that A+. I'm mad or I'm disappointed or sad or there's some emotion tied to me missing that one question, whether it's, trauma, whether it's, I'm gonna get in trouble, but there's something that's important within that small little beat right there that, you know, you keep overlooking. And I think that's where, for me, the way that I approach it. And I've taken the time to really start to reach out to people within these communities to understand what it feels like. I wouldn't be able to feel it, but to understand when you talk about something and how to take that pain and give it form and then present it back to you like, okay, does this feel right to you? Does this feel like what you would want people to understand about how you view or handle this, you know, because that's heavy. Even what you said, when people are congratulating you or if people are saying, you did such a good job, you're looking at this family now and you're looking at their pain. Everyone else around you is like, oh, well, you did such a great, but you're like, well, damn, look what they're going through. Their family's broken. This person's, and like you said, that image that you just told me about the claw marks, that's something that you can't unsee. And what ifs are haunting.
Well, and so on that note too is the other thing that gets to me on that exact call actually is so we get there and the mom's outside. She's trying to grab the kids as fast as she can, doing her mom duties and doing what she can. And she gets that first kid out. We try to go back in with the gear on. The fire's too hot. It goes through the gear. Next thing we know, we try to explain to mom, hey, look, we can't get to him. We know he's in this bedroom, but we can't get to him. As soon as we said that, she breaks free of us because we're trying to take care of her. She breaks free and tries to run in that house. So she gets third-degree burns on her arms. And that was one of the hardest things in my life that I've had to do is pull a mom away from the house trying to save her baby. Again, like you said, yeah, it sucks. And it's something that I won't ever get out of my head. And that's one reason I'm glad I get to talk to someone like you today is, you are able to orchestrate and properly verbalize the ways that we feel into ways that everyone else can understand, you know. And you just doing your research, you having your buddy that's a former EMT volunteer, I'm sure that helps you understand some of our stuff as well. Um, and the pain is real, of course. All trauma is real. Um, and the knowing of what is actually wrong in us and having the words to say it. Um, I know you asked me to to push a little on this part a little bit as well, but um, it's huge for the audience because the trauma and the depression, they're not always loud out. They're not always out loud. Sometimes the calls we go on can be 10 minutes. Sometimes it'll be a few hours, but the pain lasts God knows how long. And you understand that. Better question is how how do you understand about it so much as it is a slow progress in the end? I guess you could say.
Number one, dealing with, grief and depression myself and knowing I'm still processing it, even though I've learned how to shape it and externalize it more, it's still a up and down. And, there's a few things within that made me honestly really start to do writing was I really hated the depiction, whether it's in novels, TV shows, movies of mental health. Number one, I hated that. I loved the movie Taken. I did love some of the lines in there, but I hated how they showed mental health. His daughter got kidnapped. Well, she got kidnapped twice. uh, Almost sold into sex trafficking, was put on drugs, all of this stuff. And at the end of taking one, she just fine. She's smiling. You know, they had that little image of her smiling at dad and waving. And it's like, that's not how this
Not
works.
real life.
Exactly. You know, you're not going to just be okay. And grant you could say they time skip, you could say whatever, but if you're going to have someone go through something traumatic and that's the plot point of the movie and stuff, at least show them kind of having some up and down moments. Let people know that when you see someone go through something traumatic, it's not that they just magically get fixed. And because that makes other people feel broken. I felt broken before because it's like, well, this person went through some traumatic stuff. They lost someone they love, and look at them. They're smiling in this, TV show or this book, or even, during Mental Health Awareness Month, a lot of mental health companies will step into that where it's like, well, I know you're struggling, but the world's better with you in it. Well, when I'm depressed, like really depressed, miss me with that shit. Excuse my language. I
You're
don't want
good.
to I don't want to hear the world is better with me in it, because that's not going to reach me.
Yeah.
And so this made me really take, trying to give a real perspective on it, seriously, because it allows for people to understand that, when you're reading something that's heavy, it's not always, like you were just saying, a happy ending. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be told, because you're masking things that need to be said. And,
Yeah.
it's hard to explain in certain cases how my mind works. Like I said, I just naturally do this, and sometimes I can't put it in the word, but listening to you talk about that call, in my world, there's different energy. So there's lumen, which, as children, you have this, just a pure energy. And then as you, get older, it turns to lucent, which you basically are capable of wielding then. So without going super deep, but when I'm listening to you talk, since you gave the age of that child, in my mind, the concept that I would think of to like externalize kind of what you were saying would be like a folklore called the lumen on a dresser. And, instead of saying that real deep visual of claw marks, I would use in my world, you know, the concept of, losing someone, but the mother seeing that residual lumen or that energy of, a young child would be the way that I would word it and tie those together. And I think, again, sometimes being able just to say things in a different manner allows it to become approachable, because this conversation me and you're having, I'm aware that if you said it to certain mothers, certain males, other people, this isn't a conversation some people would be able to stand. They'll be like, they'll may smile awkwardly or crack some kind of weird joke, or I gotta go. And so now you will start to feel like, okay, I can't talk about this because it makes other people uncomfortable. So what do you do in that case? Well, you suppress it. You put it to the side. You cope with it in unhealthy manners, because you've learned from other people not being willing to, or not being capable of, just listening or witnessing that pain, that you don't have an outlet for it, outside of your grouping. You could talk to other first responders about it because they dealt with it or they know people who dealt with it. But, you know, that doesn't help other people understand you in a way that allows you to, you know, decompress, unless you're at work with these people. And I do apologize because I was explaining all this. Now I forgot the root of the question, but you know,
Oh man, you're good. I'm sure you answered it. Actually, you answered it a few times now. But so just a couple more real quick. So I want you to picture something real quick for me. I want you to picture someone listening to this alone. Maybe they're a medic who hadn't slept all night due to a call. Maybe they're a firefighter whose family thinks they're fine. Maybe they're a dispatcher carrying voices home, which mad respect to y'all because I couldn't do that shit. Maybe their spouse who knows something is wrong, but they can't get the person to love. They love to say it. Maybe they're just someone who has known for years that something is wrong, but has never had the words to say it. If that person is listening tonight or today, and the silence feels heavier than language, what do they need to hear from you today?
the first thing I would say is number one, and this part may sound a slight cliche, but number one, you're not broken, because I think it's easy to feel like you are. Like I said, I felt that way. I know other people who feel that way. And once you start feeling that way is when you start, I feel, down, the other paths of, okay, well, I'm already messed up. So what matters if I, break more, or, something negative more happens. But the other portion would be, if you're listening and you need to hear something, it's the fact that even if you don't have words for it, there's words for what you're feeling. And there's someone who could take that and help you mold that into something that's you're able to, I don't want to say deal with, because, it's a everyday thing, but help you mold that in a way that you can see it. So it's not just stuck internally inside of you, and you're just kind of replaying that and stuck in that loop. I think that's the most important. The important piece is, if whether it's writing, whether it's singing, drawing, whether it's having someone else build that externalization for you, getting those thoughts out in a way where you can see it and it's not internal, I think is a big help. And then if you're capable and you find either someone or you're able to do it yourself, of getting those thoughts out on paper in some kind of way, or getting those where other people can interact with it, I think that starts the process of being able to bridge that misunderstanding. Because like I said, it's not always what you say or the wording, it's just the weight behind what is said that I think help others realize, okay, I don't need to understand this fully, but I just know that because of the weight behind it, that this means something to you and I need to be present for you.
Well said. So, Justin, if people want to find more, blah, 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 I can't speak. If people want to find more about you or the Vaelorinverse, Burning Guilt, learn more about the spoken word campaign, or connect with you and what you're building, where could they find out about that?
So I'm on every social media at J Vaelorin. So that's JVAELORIN. And they can also, of course, find me and find all my work in, memorial, like I said, the Whisper of the Veil, the memorial wall.
It rubs off
You
on
know, yep. The different folklore, and, all my work on Vaelorinverse.com, VAELORINVER se.com. I'm also in the process in, I think this would be actually a great thing to ask you right now. I would love to have your opinion on some pieces of clothing that I want to do. I started looking at doing clothing for different occupations. So my hope is in my world is that the folklore become kind of a way that people can see the weight they're carrying outside of themselves. And I know for some people, because I have 2 tattoos of my grandmother, um, you know, some people need physical items.
The tattoo of my dad on my leg. So
Exactly. And so I started looking at different ways of, trying to help externalize or bring awareness to the weight of these different occupations. I'll send you an image of it. Like for firefighters, I have a shirt that shows a line, which in my world, like I said, threads are an important part. So you'll see threads in all my work, from, it cuts across the fire and it says, we are the line where all fires stop. And, letting people know that this is where you stand. You stand in the middle of all of this, this raging inferno, to make sure that everything else behind you is safe. And, it's not yelling that, I have trauma from my job. It's not, but it's also acknowledging this is real weight that you carry. Like, not everybody is willing to stand there, suit or not, and let fire roar towards them, So, these are the things that I tell people. You can find me. I love getting opinions of those who are in that field. Does this feel true to you? What would you want people to understand, because I'm not part of this field. I'm witnessing what you're telling me. What would you want people to get from this? So when they interact with you, it doesn't feel shallow. It doesn't, bring up these negative thoughts. So I would love your opinion on some of that.
I'd be honored. That'd be great. And just a huge shout out to you for this. Thank you for coming on, talking about the depression, the mythology, the silence, burning guilt, survivor's guilt, family, language, the silence we don't speak. And everyone listening, if this episode hits close to home, don't just swallow it and go back to pretending. Send it to somebody. Send it to a responder who carries something they cannot name. Send it to a person whose music that went quiet. Send it to the spouse trying to understand the silence. Or send it to a person who needs a different language before they can just say the truth out loud. I'm going to go ahead and stop. If you think it's too heavy to say it anyway. It beats a eulogy. You don't have to apologize for surviving however you can. You're not the reason things are heavy. You're the reason they're still moving. Need support right now? Reach out to me. Reach out to somebody. Text or call 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. You're not alone. Not in this job. Not in this fight. Want to share your story or connect? Visit critical-run.com or message the Facebook page, Dispatched and Dysfunctional. We're building this for you, for them, for all of us.